Wednesdays We Read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. Right now, we are breaking the earth. And discussing the characters and themes of the final book of the series, The Stone Sky.
Stone Sky.
But before we do a deep dive into book 3, Laura, what are you reading, watching, and or enjoying?
So, not a lot. I've been just kind of going through it, I feel like. But I did watch the Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, which I've been wanting to watch for a really long time because I wanted to go see it in theaters and I was unable to make it when it was in theaters because I think around here it was only in theaters like 2 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
And then they pulled it and I wasn't willing to drive 2 hours to go see it. So I just thought, okay, I'll wait till it's streaming. And so I watched that and I really liked it actually. I think that it got maybe a little too much hate.
You mean a Lord of the Rings thing that got too much hate?
People are just like so precious about some fandoms, you know what I mean? That I think they become toxic, and especially the ones where it's like, hate to say it, male dominated fandoms, they have just become a little toxic where people are over the top with their reactions to expanding out the work of some of this stuff. And this one in particular, I mean, there's not like a ton of things to mess up here because they kind of created their own story. There's not a lot of background in any of Tolkien's written works about the Rohirrim specifically.
Right.
So I feel like the creators of this movie had quite a bit of leeway to make something here without like enraging fans. But it is a movie about a woman. So that is bad, obviously.
I would love if that was the Laura take. Like, I know that you were being mocking, but imagine if, like, what, 3 or 4 years into this podcast, you were like, well, it did star a woman, which is bad.
Yeah, that is bad. We don't like when women are the stars. So, but it's about a woman named Hera, who is the daughter of King Helm Hammerhand, who was, and this takes place, I think, like a couple hundred years before The Hobbit.
Okay.
And Helm, obviously, we talk about like Helm's Deep of like the Two Towers, the Battle of Helm's Deep. And the Rohirrim. So this is where this is all kind of focused, is within Rohan. But we follow the daughter of King Helm Hammerhand, Hera, and she is kind of betrothed to it's basically a betrothal game where they're trying to figure out where their best allies are going to come from by marrying her off. And these Dunlendings come and they offer their son Wolf to be her betrothed, and they're rejected. And Wolf's dad is pissed about it and decides that he will fight Helm over the whole deal for rejecting him. And he ends up, Fricka is the dad of Wolf, and he ends up dying in a fight, which then causes Wolf to go on this huge binge basically of like creating this huge army and going against the people of Rohan and Helm and Hedda, and just like basically this huge pouting fest and gathering all these people to fight against Rohan. But I thought it was a really good story, and I think a lot of the people that were like whining about it kind of just maybe don't like women. And this story to me was, I've kind of been watching a lot of shows recently where there's a theme of like rejected men pouting that they don't get the woman that they quote unquote deserve.
Right.
And that was kind of the thing here, where Hedda is this very capable and like strong woman within her community. She doesn't really even think she wants to be married. And so it's an interesting story to see the way that like she has to deal with this man who's like basically just throwing a huge fit and starting a war because the girl he likes won't marry him.
Right.
And so the people that are like complaining about this movie online, I'm like, I don't, none of them kind of mentioned this theme really, but I picked up on it right away where it's like, wow, he's pouting because he didn't get his girlfriend that he wanted,
Yeah. Like,
which seems like a real thing that could happen. So, yeah, and it's all kind of like portrayed in the guise of like, oh, well, like my people were, I don't know, put down by you rejecting me or whatever. So, but to me, it's more of like a personal take that Wolf has where he takes it very like to heart that
right.
Hera doesn't want to be with him specifically, that it says something about him. And so there's this whole attack on Rohan and just this huge battle to try and win over the kingship of the land. And I think that the animation, so it's an anime also, the animation took me a
Right.
little bit to get used to because like the background looks very realistic. And I think this is what they had intended, where it looks like real background, but then you have animated characters that are walking within like
Interesting.
a real background. So it takes a little bit to get used to. But once I did really enjoy the movie.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it's my favorite Lord of the Rings movie by far, but I did really enjoy it. I thought that it was entertaining. I probably would rewatch it. And I think that it's there's a lot of media right now that seems to be like s- cautionary tales of men not getting the woman that they want.
And of course, a bunch of people in the comments being like, it's because it's a war on men. And it's like, again, I always feel so many different ways about that, where I can understand feeling bad about things and things like that. But like, also, women were treated so dismissively for years and years and years. And
Hmm.
watch every romantic comedy where women are just like treated as if they're trash and having any expectations of a man is the worst thing they could possibly do. And then come
Hmm.
back and tell me it's a war on men because like it's not like we always have like waves of media and it's ridiculous to me where it's like women saw that message and learned I need to have more hobbies. I need to get more
Hmm.
involved with my work. I need to have a better community of friends. And men see it and say women are making us feel bad. And I think that those are very interesting takes because it shows
Yeah.
a more internal view of yourself of like what am I making important versus someone is doing this to me. Like you are still in control of your own actions in these
Hmm.
moments, but like that's where I don't know. I've recently been I I rewatch Sex and the City so often, but I'm like at the core of that, like it's four women who have different dynamics interacting with each other, and that's an
Sure.
interesting thing that we don't get to see very often. And
Hmm.
like a huge part of it is how they all each get annoyed when a man starts getting centered because their friendships are more
Yeah.
important to them. And it's like, well, then just like then go make friends, go make connections. You can do that.
Hmm.
And it can be healthy and it can help you grow. And maybe it's not women's fault that media is like looking at very specific thing through a certain lens right now.
Yeah, I think I hope that men don't take away from this. Like, if a girl rejects you, you should start a war. But that would be really bad. Um, but I was also thinking too, like, I just recently watched Mufasa, and spoilers for Mufasa, everyone, that Scar has like, or Taka has a similar type reaction when he's rejected by the girl he
Oh
likes, the
gosh.
lioness, that he's like, you know what I'm gonna do? Kill everyone. It's like, is
Yeah.
that the best solution here? But I mean, for us watching it, we can, like you said, take away the message of like, oh yeah, this is bad. You shouldn't be jumping to that type of conclusion.
Right. Like,
maybe maybe it's time for some self-reflection here to
yeah.
figure out why you were rejected in the first place, and maybe not take it so personally, because like I know in specifically the War of the Rohirrim, like Hera does not really seem to have an interest in
Right.
being married. And her whole takeaway from the entire experience, she doesn't, spoilers for this movie, she doesn't go on to be the leader of the kingdom. She goes off and decides to go on adventures because she wants to
Right.
be a shield maiden. She doesn't want
Which
to be a queen.
I think we should have more stories. But I specifically, this is such a random take to be thinking about, just like think about all the media we consume. But in weird weird. I'm prefacing that with this. Pitch Perfect 3, terrible movie.
I never
In
saw
it,
it.
oh my gosh, it's so bad. But in it, Anna Kendrick said like she had enough producing power where she meets this person who wants to like give her a job and put her into the spotlight, whatever. And they were pushing a love story between the two of them. And she was like, no, she doesn't need a love
Right.
story in this. This is ridiculous. We're not doing this. And also, like, that's really irresponsible of any person who's trying to
Hmm.
enter into the media to start a love relationship with a future producer that they wish to work with. So she's not going to be doing that. And it's like, yeah, we could have more stories where people just don't end up with someone. It's okay. Like,
Yeah, now you've got me thinking if I can like name any movies where the woman doesn't have a huge part of the story be her relationship or love life.
yeah, I'm like, I Googled it, which is funny because like AI is obviously trash because it's like, here are some movies where the female lead doesn't have a romantic love interest. And the second one is The Hunger Games,
The Hunger Games,
which
that's a huge part of the plot.
what are you talking about? But they did say Mad Max Fury Road, those two characters don't seem to have any like love tension with them, which I do
Okay.
appreciate that one. I would say Moana, which is a children's movie, but also children's movies
But you
don't
know
have to have
what?
love interests.
That's a
Like,
great example, actually. I think that one is actually pretty good representation in general.
I do love this one in the sci-fi horror that AI provided, The Exorcist.
What?
The Exorcist, she doesn't have a love interest, Laura.
Oh,
That girl is
okay.
just possessed by the devil. So
God,
they also had
these are
Alien,
awful examples.
which Alien's a good example that where they don't have a love interest. Like
I've
she's
never
just trying
seen
to get.
Alien. I probably
I
should.
recently watched it, and there's no love interest in that. Ooh, Captain Marvel and the Marvels. They
Yes.
don't have love interest. It's about family. See, there are some
I
out
will
there,
say
but I
though, I'm
do
pretty
think it's
sure
helpful
Captain
to.
Marvel within the comics has
Well,
Warhammer
that's true, but like,
as a love interest, but we'll
but for kids
we'll let
getting
that
into
go.
modern media today, like that's nice that there are some movies where they don't have to
Yeah.
fall in love
I
at
mean,
the
I
end of
think we're
it.
getting better at it.
Yeah,
Um, so there's that.
yeah. Oh, Lady Bird, technically it's partly about like romance because she's getting romance, but by the end of
Okay.
it, she is kind of alone, so that's true. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I just think like it's nice to have a movie like this where
Mm-hmm.
it's like you don't need a man or a like romantic interest for that. So
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's kind of annoying that we have to have so many of these movies that are just like so centered around relationships. And here's the
Mhm.
thing, I get it that relationships are interesting to people and also they do make up a huge portion of people's lives.
Yes.
So there is that. And I know that like a lot of people, if you ask them like to reflect back on like their life or important moments in their life, they do center around relationships for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
I'm not discounting the importance of relationships.
Right.
However, when we're talking specifically about like movies that are fantasy movies or animated movies or like, The Exorcist, um it's
She just wants to defeat Beelzebub. I don't
oh
know
my
if that's I've never seen The
gosh.
Exorcist, but
Oh my gosh. Okay. But I just I kind of feel like we don't necessarily need to have or and did I say Warhammer? It was War Machine. Was
War Machine.
Captain
Oh, you
War
did say
Machine. I don't know
Warhammer,
why I was thinking Warhammer.
so
That's a video game, isn't it? War Machine. Sorry, that just like popped back into my brain. But no, I feel like when we're talking about like animated movies and fantasy movies, fictional movies in general, it doesn't need to be like a huge part of their story that they have to have a relationship. I
right.
know that they built in the relationship between or built up the relationship between Aragorn and or well Eowyn to
Arwen.
and
Yeah, yeah.
Arwen in the LOTR trilogy,
Hmm.
but I don't remember that relationship like having a huge portion in the novels, and I've read them several times. I remember Eowyn and Faramir having a larger portion, honestly,
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
played up
Well, because they
Aragorn
like
and Arwen because they
yeah.
were recovering together and spending a lot of
Well,
time
because
together.
Arwen is just kind of like off in the distance, thinking about entering a forest the entire time.
Yes,
So we
there's like
don't see
two
them that
women in this whole
often.
book. So
Yeah.
we
And
don't
they
get
both
much.
have to find someone. Like, and for a
Yes.
while, it's the same man. So I don't know what
Hmm.
to tell you.
But they definitely like play it way up in the movies.
Yes.
But I would say though, for the most part, even those movies are not like highly focused on that relationship. It's more about the relationships between the members of the fellowship, if
Yes.
anything, which I greatly prefer. And I
Yes.
think that we have some good examples in that series of movies of like what healthy masculinity is like.
Yeah.
And I think that the War of the Rohirrim kind of shows us the flip side of like what toxic masculinity looks like.
Hmm.
Like, oh, you got beat by a girl, you're pissed. Oh, a girl rejected you and you're pissed. Oh, like that. Maybe you need to reevaluate your choices here. If the first step is to declare war because a girl rejected you.
There is like a TikTok influencer, Drew Afwalo, who talks about like men who are in like female athletes comments where they're like, "Oh yeah, she'd never make it in like she would never make it in the big leagues. She'd never make it in the NBA." And she's always like, "Dude, you couldn't make it in the big leagues. Like you couldn't make it
Right,
on this female team. Like you're sitting there thinking like if only I were playing against these women, I would definitely win." Like she's like, "What's
right.
wrong with you?"
That's like me watching the Olympics and being like, so easy. I could totally do a
Yeah,
backflip. Like,
exactly. Like
no, you couldn't, Laura. You're sitting on
yeah.
your couch in your living room. You can't do that.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot easier to be like a critic or a little bit more positive on your own situation from behind a screen and on a keyboard than it
Yeah.
is to like do some actual self-reflection. But
People will do many things before they go to therapy.
yes. And you
So,
know what? I was talking with a friend recently and I was saying, like, oh yeah, I'm in therapy, this or that, and it's been really helpful. And she said, you know what? I think everyone should try therapy once at
yeah.
least. And I was
Yeah.
like, honestly, I think that would not be a bad idea for most people and I say most people, I mean all people, to try therapy just once
I
and
think they
see
need to
how
try
you,
it twice with two different therapists though, because I think
okay.
sometimes when you have one therapist,
I
there
I've had to
there's
shop
certain
around.
yes, and also I found that like some people there's different types of people in therapy. There are the people who are in therapy to sort of be like, and this is me, it's painting with broad strokes, guys. I am not a professional. But there are people who are in it to like be diagnosed and then not go past that, where it's like, oh, yeah, you're diagnosed with this, this, and this. And it's like, well, I have these. And it's like, yes, but you're also supposed to be in therapy to learn how to fit into the world with those types of things. Like it's
Mhm.
supposed to help you get tools in your tool case. I always say, like, I have depression and anxiety, but I also know how to handle those so I can function at work. But that's why I
And what's
think
the other type?
and then there are people who are actually like doing it for the self-reflection and to make sure that they're getting the tools and making sure that they're trying to grow as a person. And I think
Okay.
it's
I thought you were
important to
just going to
have
leave us
both.
hanging with just the
I
one type there
honestly
for a
forgot that I
second.
had
You
broad
said there's
strokes,
two
and
types, and I was like, what's the other one?
that's why I have a co-host so that you make sure I finish my thoughts.
It's funny. You just reminded me. So, like, my sister does this thing that cracks up everyone in our family because she'll say, first of all, and she'll go, one. And then when she gets done with that point, and then she gets to her second point, and she'll go, and B. And instead of two, she goes to B, or she'll
That's
say
beautiful.
A, and then she'll get to the second part and she'll go two, which just cracks us all up because it's like technically you could have the letters and the numbers mixed in there,
Yeah,
but
you
she,
could.
she definitely leaves off the
That's
other
amazing.
points. So that just
I
reminded me of that, just like totally dropping the second point that you're going to do.
I love that because also in texting people, this is such a tick of mine. But I think texting is just one big long conversation. It's not broken
Same.
up. So if I haven't texted you for 2 weeks, I will sometimes just text and also, and then just keep spouting off like we were
Hmm.
in a conversation. And I have had
Yep.
new friends who are confused by that, where they're like, also, did I miss a text? And I'm like, no, I just was continuing on with an old conversation. Like,
That's kind of how I speak in normal life, though,
yeah.
where I'll be talking with my husband about something. I've been going on a lot of rants about things recently, the world.
Yeah.
And so I'll be talking about something, I'll go on a rant, and then he and I will part ways for a while, and then I'll just go back to him and I'll be like, and the other thing is that, and I'll just jump right back into where we were previously speaking.
Yeah.
And for he and I, he's picked up on the dynamic and knows it well now, but I'm sure for other people, they'd be like, wait, I thought we were done with this.
I thought we were done. No, you're never done with the conversation, especially in
No,
marriage. Like, you're never going to be done.
it never
Like,
ends.
it's one long conversation with the same person for a really long time. So,
I'm 9 years into A's and twos, and
and B,
and B, the thing is, but yeah, I would say War of the Rohirrim was a good movie that I really enjoyed. I think it got too much hate. I think that a lot of these newer additions that here's the thing. Yes, are they money grabs? Absolutely. They're trying
yeah,
to expand these worlds out so that huge fans will come and watch them. And I think that it's one of those things where they're like casting it out and they're getting some fish. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Where they're like, are a decent amount of fans who will watch it and be like, I'm just happy to be back within this world again.
yeah.
And I think I'm one of those fans where I'm not as nitpicky about some of the stuff. I also am not as deep into the lore as a lot of other people
Well,
are.
I mean, you say that, but like also, Lori, you are a huge fan who has reread these books multiple
I
times. So
mean,
I
I
do
read them
think
once
like
a year.
yeah, you read them once a year. It's not like you're sitting there being like, I'm just not that big of a fan. I've only read the books once and I have seen the movies multiple times. I am a casual fan. Actually, you are a big fan and you're not giving yourself enough credit because other people are stronger fans with stronger voices in the room. But I think your
I feel
voice
like I
matters
just
just as much
don't
as
care
other
enough
people.
to fight over the stuff, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? And I just generally and this was kind of the take I had on Rings of Power as well, because that has gotten so much backlash and hate as well that seemed undeserved. But I
Yeah.
think I'm just kind of glad to be back within the world, and
Hmm.
I'm less picky about unless they absolutely like trash something, which they have yet to
Right.
do.
So.
I I don't think that anything is like a total disaster of
But
a
also, don't
project.
come in our comments and be like, Laura has no idea what she's talking. She reads the books every year. She gets to be a big
You know
fan.
what? They can,
Like,
because I'm just gonna assume that it's somebody who didn't get the theme of War of the Rohirrim that I picked up on, which was Wolf was mad that the girl he liked rejected him.
oh gosh,
Yeah,
that's
I
wild.
guess that's gonna be the main takeaway that I get from that movie. But no, I think that I'm just glad to be back within some of these worlds, and I wish more people were like that. And unfortunately, like a lot of the fandoms that I enjoy are the ones where it's like horrendous fans. Like Star Wars is the worst about this for sure.
Hmm.
They have some of the most toxic fans, but I've greatly enjoyed a lot of the Star Wars projects that have come out recently because I don't care that much
Right.
to be like, this is a disaster. And also, I don't know that people know how to accurately evaluate things, because if they're thinking that like some of the more recent projects are worse than some of the things that happened in the original trilogy, like that animation was awful. Like some of their CGI and effects, there was none of that in
Yeah.
there. Those were some of the things were just bad. Let's be real. In the 70s movies, like, come on. Not that good. We love them, but there's things that you watch and you're like, he obviously did not kick that person. So you can't be like, it's apples and oranges. They're different times. Like they come out like 50 years later. Come on, people.
And I do think there's also an added layer. Sometimes people don't like when they realize that they're not the intended audience. Like, there are
Well,
certain
I think
shows
there's
that
also too.
I love that if I wanted to watch like a recreation of them, like it wouldn't be made for me anymore because I'm a 33-year-old woman and maybe they're not interested in my age group. So it's gonna look like if when Gossip Girl was remade, it was not for my age group. It was for a younger generation. So it wasn't going to be as interesting because when I was
Sure.
young, I loved Gossip Girl. So, like, did I ever watch it? No, but I also didn't comment on it.
Right.
Like,
I think there's, and obviously this is just everybody complains about like, oh, it's just marketing strategies or whatever. They just want to make money. Obviously, that's what they want to do. Like that's
yeah.
the whole thing. But they've been doing this forever, where they come out with something popular, and then once that generation hits that loved that thing gets to a certain age, they will do
Mm-hmm.
a remake or a
Yes.
tie-in or something similar to draw that audience back in to get more product, to get more viewership, to get money. And so they continue to do that. But when they do new projects, they hope also to bring in more
Mhm.
fans of a younger age. And
Right.
I think that one of the hardest things is like kind of watching people who are newer to fandoms come in and be excited about something and have some of the people who are the quote unquote diehards kind of put them down. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? When it's like, no, this is somebody who is trying to get into the fandom and enjoy it. I know specifically within like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, there are people who will jump in, they'll have watched like a newer TV show or they've watched some of the Rings of Power or whatever, and then they're interested. And people will say, like, I just watched Rings of Power. I really liked it. Where can I start with the books? And the people that will hate on them hardcore online about drives me nuts because it's like, just be kind and just tell them where to read Tolkien's works. Just go. You don't have to be like, well, obviously you don't know what you're talking about because you
Do you
enjoyed
understand
this.
that there are so many other great things? You wouldn't
Yeah,
even
like
appreciate the
you
original.
shouldn't have
Like,
even started with Rings of Power or whatever. And this again is just an example, but it does happen.
yeah.
And so it's kind of disappointing to see that that's the reaction people have to others enjoying content within
Things.
fictional content within a
Yeah.
fictional fandom where it does not matter. So, yeah, it's a little disappointing. And I think maybe my takeaway is just like, it doesn't matter and just have fun. And if you're not having fun, it's okay to tap out. It's okay.
Yeah. You could just
But Hannah, I enjoyed War of the Rohirrim, and
good.
I really like the soundtrack. I think I might try to acquire the soundtrack. So
Ooh, fun.
yeah, but all of the music is so good within LOTR. Love it so much.
Love to hear
Hannah,
it.
what have you been reading? Actually, I've also been playing Wingspan a lot. I
Oh,
have the game on my phone now. I got a gift card, so I used it to get the app of
I love
Wingspan.
that. That's so
So
fun.
I've been playing Wingspan on the app and on BGA and my actual physical board game of Wingspan. So much Wingspan. But yeah, I really like Wingspan. And I also got Root, and I'm not as good at Root, but I'm very new to it. I'm still kind of learning, but it's very cute game and I actually really like the concept of it and everything. So it's kind of like a territory game and um I like the art too. It's just cute. I'm kind of drawn to the cuter board games where
Yeah.
I like the colors and like cute designs and stuff like that. Some of them that look a little rougher, like I've watched several YouTube videos where people are recommending solo board games, and if they don't have like a cute art style, I'm like, I don't
Not
know.
for
It looks a
me.
little scary.
That's amazing. I
And
love
I'm a
that.
baby who needs something that looks cute, like the Flamecraft dragons. So that's the type of board game I'm drawn to is cute little dragons baking bread and making potions.
It's amazing.
So I've been enjoying a lot of Wingspan. I'm getting much better at Wingspan just from playing it a lot. And I've been really happy about that. Like my solo um
Oh, sorry.
oh, my solo play, I've noticed that my scores went up quite a bit where I was
That's
really like
exciting.
sitting within like this is gonna be a mission or around like 60 for a score, but now I'm up a lot to around like 80 for most of my scores. So I've gotten quite a bit better at playing Wingspan. So that is nice. And I'm thinking about getting like one of the expansions for it to see because I'm pretty interested in like the uh Asiatic expansion to see if that one is as beautiful as it looks. And
Okay.
yeah, so that's what I've been watching and enjoying. Hannah, what about you?
So, for reading, I promised I would talk about this, and so here I am. I read Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I
Yes.
really enjoyed this book. I read it for book club, but it's been
Your
been
book
on my
club has
shelves.
good picks.
Thank you. I They picked it. This is one of our like first fantasy. It was very funny because we went to book club and they're like, "We're always reading fantasy," and I'm like, "The last one we read was like The Golem and the Djinn, and it was last year, so I don't know what we're talking about. But
Always reading fantasy. You read that weird like nonfiction self-help book, didn't
yeah.
you?
Well, we do every other. So, like, we always do a
Okay,
nonfiction and then a fiction. So, it has upped my nonfiction reading exponentially.
that's
Except
good.
next month, we're reading Invisible Women, which is a little bit of a
Hmm.
turf nonfiction book and a little bit outdated. So, I
Not
think
heard
that
of that
that's,
one. So,
yeah, it's like, it's nothing we didn't know, nothing we weren't just talking about where, women are
hmm.
not the test subjects for medication or
Mm.
impact on like car dummies. Like it's all the world
Hmm.
is built for men and we're just
Oh
living in
yeah.
it. So, but I read Black Sun. This is an interesting book. It's kind of like a multi POV, or we're like looking at different characters throughout it. And there is like, oh, there's like this holy city and they're getting ready for their winter solstice, and we find out like there is this like god reborn who's coming to set the world right, and he's traveling with this captain of a ship, Jyla, who is a disgraced teak person, and like teak is a type of person who can like sing and calm the waters. That she's kind of like a, she's not a mermaid, but she has like similar like siren and like mermaid like qualities to her, and she is super fascinating. She was my favorite. And then this like crow god reborn is traveling with her, and there is also this like high priestess of Tova who is trying to kind of like, she's within the political system and trying to figure out ways to like work within it and see if she can make any changes. And this is just like a really interesting book. It has really wild world building and it's very rich, but it's also non-European cultures. So we get to see things that I don't think we get to read very
Because
often.
if I'm remembering right, Rebecca Roanhorse is an indigenous person,
She is an
and
indigenous person, and
so
this is
yeah, I would
very
assume that that
indigenous.
has a lot of influence there.
Yes, and like certain parts of the world, like you have the way the city is described, certain areas of the city seem to be described like it's Mesoamerican, where they have like the step type houses and things like that. And it has like the look at what it, because indigenous people believe that there is a third like non-female or male gender, and and Rebecca Roanhouse plays with that in her world
Hmm.
building. And it's just amazing. I really enjoyed reading this book. It goes by super fast. Like on Storygraph, everyone's like it's slow. And I'm like, I think people say slow because it's over 500 pages. It's not
Oh,
slow. It is like a really fast moving book. The chapters are short.
hmm.
So like, and I think there's something here for everyone who loves
Hmm.
fantasy, because like I read it, I really liked Jyla, but I also really liked the politics of the high priestess, because that was like the stuff that made me the most uncomfortable, because you're kind of
Sure.
watching these machinations and things get away from her, and I liked that part of it. And but other people were like, "Oh no, Serapio, the crow god, is like this super interesting backstory," or people loved the world building. And there were some people who were like, in my book club, there were some people who didn't always get the world building, but I think I found it really effective because I'm not someone who has to have like, this is the world Rebecca Roanhorse wrote and it's exactly as she pictured it, and I have to know the exact map. I'm kind of into wishy-washy because I'm like, my mind
Hmm.
doesn't really know what's going on. So like
Hmm.
so I thought it was really enjoyable for the way she builds the world. And I'm very
I think that
interested
I'm
in reading
gonna
the other
jump in real
books.
quick though, just to say that it depends on the book and the person's
Yes.
style of writing too, because there are times when I find myself more able to go with the flow, and then
Mm-hmm.
there are other times when I'm reading a book, and I think it's maybe if like they bring up the world building or the magic too much or how it works, that
Yes,
and they don't explain it, then
that's
I'm
true.
like, wait a minute, I need to know what's going on here because I don't understand how they just magicked that away. And I'm confused. So if
Right.
it's written in a way that it makes sense for things to kind of not be as super explained, then I think that's okay. But it sounds like maybe that's the situation here. But
Yeah.
there are times when I'm like, I need this explained to me more because it's not making sense.
That's fair. I do think in this one it makes sense, like the way that it's mysterious and the way that Rebecca Roanhorse writes. She's a phenomenal writer. So, highly recommend this book. I had a great time with it. And if you read it, talk to me about it because I want to talk about it. I thought it was so good. So,
I
Laura,
need to read
please
that
read
soon.
this. I know,
How,
like,
you said it's over 500 pages?
yeah. So
Maybe I
it's
should
it
do
is
it
a
for Mega
chunker.
May.
You could do it for Mega May. It would count. But yeah, so that is one of the books I'm reading. The other one is I did finish up the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series.
Okay.
Wild third book. So wild. Laura, if I told you if I like broke down the plot of these two books and then said, and then in the third one, like halfway through, someone gets set up for murder, you're like, what? It's like it's a wild take of like revenge for, and I think it's kind of interesting because I think it's a lot of fun, but I also am like, I wonder how parents would feel about like young girls reading this book where like in the third book there's just like a revenge plot. Like
Okay.
it's so interesting. So I thought they were really enjoyable. I really liked them as audiobooks. They are a little bit overly long in my opinion, but I also think that that is young adult when you have like a murder mystery or like
Yeah.
it just tends to be a little bit longer because so much is happening.
I honestly
Um
think young adult books have gotten pretty chunky.
yeah, they've gotten so I mean Oathbound is huge and we're about to read
hmm
that.
Well, I was
So
just
like
thinking like Strange the Dreamer. That one
oh
struggled with the length
yeah.
of that one by Laini Taylor, and that one is a YA label. So I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of
Well,
YA books that are pretty chunky.
I mean, when I was younger, I used to read really chunky novels, though, because I think about
hmm
like A Great and Terrible Beauty. I think the third one of that was so long. And
hmm
so I do think certain fantasy ones, especially, get to be like really thick, or like
Yeah.
I did think this one was really long, though. It was
And,
15
and like
hours.
Dune, that
Like,
one is
yeah,
super
Dune is
long.
so long. Like, gosh, YA is just getting out of hand.
Herbert was ridiculous.
But then the third book I read, I also did this via audio because it was available at my local library. It was one of the authors that we've had on our author highlights over at our pod, and that's The Reluctant Coroner by Paul Austin Arduin. Paul is a part of the writing group that I sometimes go to. I've been there a little bit less lately just because I'm trying to work on my book at home. And like sometimes my ADHD means like if I've gone to a place too often, it stops having the same like tick for my brain that like
You're
I,
too
I think
comfortable there.
I'm too comfortable and I don't do as
You
much
specifically
work.
have a thing where you have to remove yourself from a comfortable place and go to a place where you're not as comfortable to
Hmm.
work.
Yep. Laura lived with me in the sorority, and I was well known to never study in the sorority or study in this little closet off the computer room that I would just like hole up in for hours upon hours of the
hmm
day, where I was like, this is just where it works. And so, but I really liked this book. Paul is very good. It's kind of like I would say it's a modern day gumshoe story where we follow Fenway Stevenson, who her dad named after a ballpark. And she's returned home to her estranged father because he said he'd help her find work. And we find out that like her mother left him and he like cut off all ties with them. So he was very wealthy, but they didn't have a lot of money before her mom passed away. And the first book, he gets her a job as a coroner for a while because it's an elected position, but you can be placed in it for a temporary status. And the other coroner was just murdered. And so she has to figure out what happened. Um, I thought the book was really interesting. It had good layers, it had a lot of like messiness. And at the end of it all, it is about a woman's relationship with her dad and trying to find out if she actually thinks that she could have a fulfilling relationship with him. And I thought he handled it well. If you read the interview with him, this is a biracial character who he has like a lot of sensitivity readers for, and he handles her with a lot of care. So I thought it was very well paced and very interesting. So go check out my interview with him and go check out The Reluctant Corner because it was a good time. I did the audiobook and it's also interesting listening to an audiobook for indie publishing. I hadn't done that yet. So it's interesting
I
to
feel
see
like a
like,
lot of indie published books, it's expensive to get
yeah,
audiobooks, and especially if you don't know that it's going to take off, like
right.
it's a big swing to say, I'm
Yes,
going to get an audio narrator for this.
exactly. And so
That's
if
why
you
you should reach
did,
out to
then
your friendly local podcaster who likes to.
Laura would love to narrate your book.
I
Please
would love
at
to narrate a
her.
book, honestly. But I
It's
have
her goal.
such a specific voice that I would have to do like YA books. I feel like there's
I think you
you
could
know it's
do
true. Like I
a
have such a
rom-com.
specific voice that I'd have to do this like
I,
specific YA book because my voice sounds so young.
I don't know. I think you could definitely do the reluctant hero really well because you would do very well at the like they're in a meeting of a magazine and the protagonist has a hard time finding her voice and you would do good with the like, oh, excuse me, like I actually had a suggestion.
Hmm.
So those are where Laura will really shine. So make sure she's getting those parts.
This
Um,
also reminds me of how my sister will often imitate my dad, but whenever she does, she makes him sound terrible. Where his voice, like she'll imitate other people too, but when she imitates my dad's voice, it's very much like, "Whoa, I thought I was gonna go over and do that," and it's
that's not what he
hilarious.
sounds like at
It's
all.
not
But
what he
she's like,
sounds like
yeah,
ever,
that's definitely him.
but she's gives him a terrible rendition.
So funny.
So yeah, that just
Just
makes me laugh. Maybe I'll bring in my sister to help me narrate. We'll do,
exactly.
we'll tag
she,
team it.
she could be the man.
Yeah.
You don't understand.
And that's how she makes him sound. If anyone needs my dad's voice via my
Oh,
sister.
perfect. But then for watching last night, we did a watch party. We go back and we watch random old movies, and it was cartoon night. So we watched The Secret of Nim, one of my favorite
Okay.
movies growing up. Did you ever see that one?
I never saw it. It's about mice. You've mentioned
It,
it many times.
yes, it's one of my favorites. It's a story about a woman
Which
mouse
it's
who
rats, isn't it? Or is
no,
it
well,
mice?
there are rats and mice. The main
Okay.
character is Mrs. Brisby. She does not have a first name. What a wild take, where they're like this female
It's
protagonist.
Mrs.
Yeah, Mrs. She's a widowed field mouse, and she lives in a cinder block with her children on a farm. And one of her children has pneumonia, and so she wants to save him. But it's about to be moving day because the like the farmer is about to start planting season, so everyone gets displaced during this time. They have to move, and she can't move her son without putting him in danger. So she goes on this quest to try to save her children. And in doing that quest, she finds out that there's a huge backstory of her husband that she had no idea about. And you find out that there are these very intelligent rats living in a rose bush, and a lot of political things going on. It is like the actual
Mice be mousing.
it was really funny because I'm watching it with my sister-in-law, and like they the rats at the beginning, they're like you hear this overview of like the farmer's wife being like, "Oh, we were called by like this place, and they asked us if the rats had been acting strangely." And the rats are like stealing an extension cord at some point, but they like steal the whole extension cord and take it into the rose bush. And then you see like electricity, and I was like, "That's not how electricity works." Um, so I do think The Secret of Nim does actually hold up. Except
Okay.
there's weird things that like when you watch a movie as a child, like so much of your psyche is just like, this is totally fine, where there's just random
No,
dialogue that's like
that doesn't
thrown
happen.
it's like random dialogue that's thrown away where it's like, that's as if we had strange rats running around. And I was like, oh yeah, this is totally normal. And as an adult, I'm like, excuse me? I think I would have so
Strange
many
rats.
questions
Oh,
if
yeah.
the government was reaching out to me and asking me about strange rats.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember thinking like, wow, I really love the romance between her and this rat. And she's a mouse and he's a rat. And then I was like watching it, I was like, well, she's a widow like recently. So that's weird that I had that like implication. I was like, maybe it was just like I was a child, and when you're a child, you don't think about how inappropriate it would be to just fall in love with someone right after your husband died. But
I
also,
thought you meant like the like hybrid species possibility that
I
could
mean, that was
occur.
also probably a problem, but not in
Hmm.
Hannah's mind when she was a
Gotcha.
child. But also, there is a moment where they make eyes at each other for a significant period of time. And so my sister-in-law was like, no, that
Oh
wasn't in your
my.
head. That was like actually on the page, sexual tension between this widowed mouse and a rat.
A race combo.
Yeah, a race combo. So, I mean, I guess they look similar. So they're like, same thing. It's, they can fall in love. But they're actually
Okay.
built on like children's novels. I had never read any of them, but I did find that out.
I feel
And
like I think you have talked about this before, and I feel like did we look this up at one point? Someone go back in the lore of
I'm
our
sure
pod, and I feel like we've looked this up that there are children's novels.
that there are children's novels just in general. Oh, of
Of
the
this
Secrets of
book
Nim.
of
Yeah, no,
yeah
no,
of
there's
this
definitely
Secrets of Nim.
children's novels because I did look at it and they did exist. Um, but I really liked the movie. I thought it had really good animation, like the old school animation. I missed that because this was like created in the 80s. And so it was really
Like, what do you mean the
beautiful.
old school
Well,
animation?
like nowadays it's like a lot of computer generated type animation, and this is like
Hmm.
very old animated, like kind of like a storybook and I really enjoy kind of doing a deep dive back into that.
I guess I've never seen it, so I don't know what the
And it's
animation style is. Like, compare another movie.
well, the person who directed it ended up doing animation for Winnie the Pooh. So
Oh,
like
okay.
older Winnie
Okay.
the Pooh ones, and he literally did one of Rabbit, and Rabbit like appears in the movie, and you're like, that's definitely Rabbit, right? And we like looked it up,
Oh,
and he did animate Rabbit at one point in his life. So,
okay.
a little bit of a lore piece of this. So,
Okay.
but we watched that, and then we watched Arrietty, another
Secrets
Studio
of
Ghibli
Ariadne?
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, The Secrets of Arrietty, Studio Ghibli movie, created from the borrowers. I actually grew up with the Tom Felton borrowers,
Hmm.
so I this was just a fun new experience where it was like a similar discussion, similar book, a similar storyline, but the housekeeper in that creeped me out really hard.
I actually have not seen that one.
Okay, it's really good. I would say that I'm a little bit interested to go back because I listened to the American dubbed version, which had
Hmm.
David Henry from Wizards of Waverly Place
Interesting
and
choice.
another
Okay.
Disney star, but the UK dubbed one has who's the guy who's engaged to Zendaya? Tom Holland
Tom
and
Holland. Okay.
Saoirse Ronan. And I think that one
Okay.
would probably be better, so I would just suggest doing that
I
one.
mean, Tom Holland's a little cutie, so probably.
Yeah. And it was just I was looking at, the original dub, his name is like Show. And in the movie, his name is Sean. And it's just really strange to hear a Disney Channel
Oh.
star screaming like Sean, Sean. And I was like, that man is not a Sean.
Okay.
Also he has like on the page the character that like the bean, they call them beans for human beings. Um, he on the page is like, yeah, I'm trying to recover for like heart surgery next week. So he is in
Mm.
fact deathly ill and he keeps running places. And like throughout the entire movie, we kept being like, please stop running. Like you do
Yeah.
need heart surgery. Like if this were a secret garden, like, oh, I'm a little sickly, like fine, whatever. But you do in fact need heart surgery. So maybe you should slow
Wow.
down. Like um but yeah, that was a wild swing for them. But I really liked it.
Yeah.
It's my second like full length watching. I maybe my third. I might have seen all of Kiki's Delivery Service. I cannot
Hmm.
remember. But I'm
Sounds good.
enjoying watching all
I
the
need to
different
rewatch
ones.
some of those because they're fun.
They're on Max right now, so
I know.
it's been fun to kind of do a deep dive into those. I did have to watch it over the course of 2 days though, because the first day I like fell asleep hard. I keep falling asleep while I'm watching TV because I'm getting old. So, but with that said, should we dive into the end of the world?
We're at the end. Well, we know how it ends now. We know how the
Yes.
world ended. And it ended by continuing to exist, which
Yep.
seems like a beautiful way to end,
Yeah.
honestly.
And the wheel keeps turning, as it were.
Yeah. I was thinking about that too when I was like reading this ending of this book, how there's certain themes within I was going to say the fifth season, but the Broken Earth trilogy
Hmm.
that are pretty relevant within a lot of different fantasy and sci-fi. And I feel like that remaking or like reappearing the cyclic nature of things is definitely one of the things that stands out throughout a lot of fantasy.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think that that's just because it is, I feel like when you get into fantasy, there's always like that little bit of, we're all in this, this
All
is
in
real
this
world,
together.
but it's also different and
Mhm.
you're never going to know quite what's going to happen. And I think that there is a little bit of a cyclic nature in a lot of fantasy and sci-fi where it's kind of just history repeating itself over and over
Sure.
again, which is
Sure. Yeah, I
interesting.
think yeah, it's definitely a situation where it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same throughout this. And I think fiction obviously holds up a mirror to our own world,
Yes.
and authors like to comment on the situations happening within the real world through their writing. This to me, there were themes like that, the cyclic nature of things, and how like even within just the the Broken Earth series itself, there was so many things that continued to happen within these seasons that the Earth continued to try and kill itself. Or I shouldn't say kill itself, kill the people there for taking away its child, the moon.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's interesting because a huge theme of this is kind of the personification of the world. And like you said, where it's like always trying to destroy itself, but it's also just feeling the pain of others making
Hmm.
decisions for it and putting it through
Hmm.
the work. And I do think like I've always been fascinated by the theory that humanity is just a cold that the world has to get over, and like it's a much
Yeah.
bigger thing in the universe, or like the universe is like a bigger being and we're just a small part of it. Because if you think about it, like a cold in our system could have its own manifestation and own worldview of what it belongs to.
Hmm.
We just don't understand that from like our own personal standpoint. And so I do think it's interesting that like N.K. Jemisin takes that and turns it on its head, where it's like, no, we are going to personify the world. It is going to be angry at us
Hmm.
for how we're treating it, and it is going to try to fuck shit up, really. Like,
Sure.
yeah.
I think I was also reminded too when we are talking about like nature fighting back and everything. It also gave me like flares of the Ents and the forest
Hmm.
fighting back within like the two towers and
Yeah.
how, the Saruman and the orcs are tearing down the forest and destroying all of these beautiful ancient woods and the Ents have been silent for all this time, and then they eventually decide to fight back against
Yeah.
their undoing. And I think that a lot of those vibes kind of stood out to me within this specific book because we have so many elements within the Stone Sky being brought in of like the combination of like technology and nature
Yeah.
and how even though like they can work in tandem, there was the destruction of Earth and its natural state to the point that Earth decided to fight back.
Yes. I do think that that's a really good comparison of the Ents and just kind of saying, like, well, they're going to opt out until they can't do it anymore. But I also think it's beautiful in this, like, very unique way where the earth has been tapped out for so long, but then when it comes with a vengeance.
Hmm.
And throughout
Hmm.
the story, I felt like Jemison never wanted us to disagree with the earth. Like we understood where it was coming from as this thing that is like, well, you guys have tried to destroy me. You took away the thing that, kept me at peace. And so now I don't have to feel bad when I'm destroying you, and you guys are my enemy. And I do think Jemison doesn't like hold back from actually keeping some kind of like feeling or sadness for the earth and its beliefs, and because it was harmed.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's interesting too because I wouldn't necessarily call Earth a character within this,
Yeah.
but it's definitely and I wouldn't even say that it's a villain of sorts within this. I would say that the way that this story is written is very poetic in the way that all of the other characters recognize that the Earth is fighting back against the injustices that have been
Hmm.
done to it, and that even the characters within the Stone Sky who are trying to, break the Earth and restore the moon and all these things and use the obelisk gate, they are not really, they know the Earth is fighting back, but they're not really trying to work in opposition to the Earth.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a fascinating way that you're mentioning, like, oh, yeah, we understand like why the earth would react this way or what have you. But I think it's also interesting from the standpoint of just like recognizing that the characters also can have that same understanding and they're still like, well, we have to do this in
Yeah.
order to try and sustain ourselves and try and save what little we have here because this is all we can do at this
This is
point.
all we have anymore. So,
This is our
yeah.
redemption.
Yeah. I agree. It's just so beautifully done because it's also like I like what you're saying with the fact that Earth isn't necessarily a character, because it's almost like, well, Earth is the godlike being in this book. But I think
Hmm.
in a lot of other books and a lot of other like fantasies or sci-fi, it's like the godlike being is usually like a bit ridiculous. I mean, I write about this in my own book. Like, my view of the Greek gods are that they're kind of just ridiculous beings that have been on Earth for too long. But
Hmm.
with
Hmm.
but like with the actual structure of belief in religion and belief in like God, like people or constructs, it's like, well, it's supposed to be this higher being that understands that the world or the people living in it, there's a bigger picture that they don't see. And I think a lot of lesser writings don't always get that because like, oh no, they deeply care about this or they deeply care about this. But I do think the Earth is kind of a being who is like a construct of like, well, I don't care. I'm just watching this happen and I'm going to fight for
Mm-hmm.
myself. But I also am not thinking about the intricacies of human life because it's kind of beneath me.
Well, and I think it kind of goes back to if you're thinking of, I guess I didn't necessarily take away like the from this story. I didn't necessarily take away the same like this is our God figure in
Hmm.
this. I thought of it more as just like we're within our natural state or whatever. I was literally more just within like there's not a godlike being in this.
Hmm.
But I do appreciate that take, but at the same time, I think you can also look at it from the standpoint of like you were saying earlier, just like the reaction being like it would be if it was a cold or something
Yeah.
like that, that you just have a natural reaction that your body will start to fight that thing.
Yeah. I
But
think there's a lot of different ways you could look at it. I mean,
oh, for
that's what makes
sure.
it so effective.
It's a credit to her writing that
Yeah.
she is able to get you to think about all these different like possibilities of what is actually occurring here. I think too when you're talking about or like when both of us are talking about like is there this like omnipotent figure within this story or this world? I think Jemisin has done this in a really deft way where we question whether or not Earth is this like godlike figure or not,
Yeah.
and the involvement that is there because like said, I didn't take away that it was a godlike situation, but you did. And so I think that in some other fantasy tellings we have a clearer idea of yes, there is like a godlike figure. Even
Right.
within like Lord of the Rings, there's Eru who is like a god that sends down the Maiar to Middle Earth. So yeah, I think in those type of stories there actually is like a very distinct like yeah, this is God. Or if we're talking about Greek myths or whatever, they have a group of gods. And I actually totally agree with your take on like yeah, the Greek gods are very much just like these figures who just like they have too much time on their hands and they really
Yeah.
don't care. They're just like having a bunch of sex and like, making things and destroying things because they're just like, we have endless amounts of time. Why not?
Yep. Right.
But yeah, I think it's interesting when we like take a step back and look at the way that Jemison has written this figure of the Earth as this being, but more of a detached situation where we're all like working symbiotically with each other. So
Yeah.
I think that that makes the stakes for the characters and also the Earth connected and more interesting too when they're very much reliant on each other.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah.
I
And I
kind of went on
really,
a rant there and I wasn't sure where it was going, but
no,
I
I think this is,
it
I think you
connected
and I
in
are
my
just
mind.
getting like really deep on the lore at the beginning of this because I do think there's so much here. And this is your second time reading it. Because I can say from my first time reading it, there were parts where like the start of this novel, we start seeing the POV and the creation of Hoa as he was, and we get to see his first iteration
Hmm.
and things like that. But what I found fascinating is it it is a looser structure where he's like, yes, orogeny developed out of, what I was and this and it expanded in the ways, but it's not like a direct line of, okay, here's how it
Hmm.
started, here's how it changed, here's how it is now. Like it has a very like this book is very natural in its progression where it's like, well, we don't understand how it evolves, but it did. And so we're here now and we get to see and I think Jemison is more interested in the constructs that it creates between like
Hmm.
people. So we have orogeny here and like what makes you part of, this type of human who is gifted because at the end we find that Nasun doesn't have the capability of doing it anymore, but she still sees herself as origin and that's important because you don't have to be able to use the power to still identify with that group of people or have the similar experiences through your life until you were unable to use your gift. I think that that's a beautiful way of doing things and I've just noticed
Hmm.
that Jemison doesn't seem she doesn't seem to need to build a story of like you understand every single happening and what happened when. It's all just like a mishmash. So when you go back to the book again and again, you can get different things each time.
Yeah, for sure. I think that her story in general doesn't like have we've talked about it previously, doesn't have like this hard set of rules that we
Hmm.
have to read about and understand that, well, this is this many points and this is this many points and this person's above this person in power
Yeah.
level, blah 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 blah. And like we mentioned, I think in the previous episode, like there are certain novels where we need to know more about these systems and in magic to understand the
Was
world.
in
But
this episode.
was it in this
Yeah.
episode? Okay. I'm losing track of time and we've
You're
had
fine.
internet issues, so we're recording
Yeah.
this episode in pieces. So, yeah, apologies, listeners. But yeah, I think that it's interesting the way that she writes because, like you said, she doesn't really make this in a way that's like we have to understand exactly the ways that things occurred,
Yeah.
but we get a broad strokes understanding of the way that peoples were created and the ways that the world has gotten to its current state.
Yeah.
I also think you just bringing up just identity as a theme is super important, especially within this book, because I think Nasun in particular is questioning her identity more and more and more as we get to know her through the second and into this book. And she's questioned her abilities as an origin and what it means to be an origin in a world that has hated her and now in a world that doesn't need her.
Yeah.
And I think that's fascinating, but I also think it's fascinating from the flip side of talking about Yika and Esun uh, and their journey with their own identities as origins too. Because I think those are the three that really stand out to me the most when we're talking about like identity and what it means to connect with who you are and the history and culture of your people. Those are
Yeah.
the three characters that kind of stand out the most to me when we're thinking of identity.
I definitely think so because we have like Nasun who's at the beginning of her life, who her identity is marred a little bit by her own mother's experience because there's only so much she knows about her mother at the start of the book because she is a child and her mom's not going to
Yeah.
share all the intricacies with her. But she does know that being who they are is dangerous if others find out about it. And so hers is a look at discovery and acceptance. And, we've
And she
talked.
also does have to experience the dangers and
Yes.
realities of being an origin throughout this series. But I think when we're in specifically the Stone Sky talking about her journey, she's come a long way in terms of using erogyny and accepting that she cannot change who she is and
Hmm.
wants to be an origin. She has to literally kill her father
Right.
for not accepting her. And she turns to the person who, as much as we hate this relationship, has accepted her for what she is and has supported her for what she is.
Yeah.
And I think it's then tenfold more interesting when we get to the end and she is no longer able to use that orogeny, but still identifies as an origin.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because like I don't know how to say this right because she has dealt with so much trauma, but also because she is young, there is something to be said that a lot of times younger people who don't have a developed brain can't always identify certain parts of their own trauma because they don't
Mm-hmm.
have the
Mm-hmm.
capacity to understand it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because she is someone who is incredibly young in this book, especially like she's 10,
Mm-hmm.
she's able to do things her mother isn't because she's able to accept certain parts of herself through the lens of a child where
Yes.
Nasun has so many mental roadblocks or Esun has so many mental roadblocks based on her life and based on the fact that she's coming to this as a much older woman who has dealt with a lot of trauma and loss.
Mm-hmm.
But then when she's up against Nasun knows how to work magic and orogeny all in one, and it makes her more powerful in a way that even like Esun is like, I can't comprehend how she's
Mm-hmm.
doing this or what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. that yeah, you're absolutely right when you're talking about like processing things and uh, how you are able to identify within your own self
Yeah.
for sure. I was thinking too, just before we get too far off of just like the concept
Identity
of
and yeah.
identity, that just a final thought on Nasun, that she still identifies as an origin is
Hmm.
interesting to me just because it's some you can't take away a person's identity
No.
despite the trauma and things that they go through. And I think that that is a fascinating way for this book to be written, also just very relevant
Yeah.
to the experiences that people, particularly people of color, go through in their culture and their lived experiences, and how you can remove them from situations, but there are these traumas and
Yeah.
these things that are passed on, that even though a specific person does not experience one thing, it still is passed on, and the effects of just being part of that group of people are relevant, and you can experience a lot, and you can connect with other people because of those things. And so I think it's interesting too to like, remove that orogeny from Nasun, but she still is an origin and still identifies as one, and is going to have to be in this world where
Hmm.
our orogeny is not going to be valued in the same way and looked at in the same way, and how she's going to have a unique experience
Yeah.
going forward while still identifying with that part of her so strongly.
Yeah. I agree. Well, and I think it's interesting when we take like that identity and the look at Nasun, and then we kind of almost have a mirror of experience of like Esun's experience with her own identity, because she has tried to remove the identity of, herself from the beginning of the book, or from the beginning of the first book through this. And then in this third book, she starts having these like moments where she starts accepting her identity not only as someone with origin, but someone who is part of a community that is bigger than herself. And
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
also a huge part of her identity, is the fact that she is able to travel with people. And I do think in this
I
book,
was almost going to say, like you were saying that Esun is the flip side of Nasun. I was almost going to say that Yika is like the
oh,
flip side of Nasun in this journey, and that Esun is kind of like that middle ground of sorts,
that's
where
fair.
Esun, and this is just in my perception, that I would call Esun like the middle ground of being like the person who has the lived experience, who has had a lot of trauma, who has the like traditional upbringing and
Yeah.
teaching of how to use her orogeny, has gone through the fulcrum and all this, and is also unlearning and is coming about her identity through other people's eyes, through the experiences of her daughter, through her own experiences, through the experiences of Yika and the other people within her community. But then I think I would consider Yika to be that flip side of Nasun, who has grown up in this extremely opposite way to what most origins are used to, where she was fully accepted into her community and was considered a huge asset, was always valued, was put into leadership roles, and continued to lift up other people within her community, and tried to just create space for other origins.
Yeah.
So I kind of I see them as like a trifold look at what it means to be an origin within specifically this book, but throughout the whole series, really. And I just think that Yika is what I would consider more of like the if everything goes towards the right end, this is what you would expect. Not that everything went right for Yika, but she had a lot more positive experiences and was a lot more accepted than
Yeah,
Esun
no,
and
I think that's
Nasun.
that's well said, and I do think it is amazing to see Yika in this book as kind of a juxtaposition, or the other side of things where she has been fully accepted, But now she is someone who I think she's an interesting character even more because she's someone who lost her home in the previous book.
Hmm.
And even Asun has the belief that she's mad at her for losing her home. And she's like, I'm mad at you because you don't seem to understand the realities or the choices you make affect us. And I really need you to start taking that seriously.
Well, she really
That's,
pushes Esun to be a member of the community. That
yeah,
she wants her to recognize, like, you're a powerful origin. Absolutely, you have all of this power, and people do depend on you, but you're not the only origin in the world. You're not the only one here.
right.
And so you need to recognize that we all are connected and we all have to rely on each other, and that even if you think that you can just go off and do X, Y, or Z, there are consequences, and that they
Hmm.
will not only affect the rest of us, but they can affect the rest of us in like smaller ways too, just by like the image that you portray of your people.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. It's just such a fascinating character. Like, I don't think I was expecting Yika or her overall arc to be so paramount. Like, I think I was
Hmm.
expecting more from other characters before
Hmm.
her, but I was really glad to see her kind of come to the forefront and have these challenging conversations about, like, well, you need a community. You can't do this alone. You keep trying and it's not working, and I don't understand why you won't trust us. I think it's just very smart that Jemisin handles her this way.
I feel like Yika starts off a little more like you said, you're not expecting her to be this big, powerful character throughout the series, but I think she starts off a little more quietly, and
Hmm.
that she starts to really take off in terms of character development when we get into the second book for sure. But I think that Tonki is maybe like a little bit the opposite, where Tonki starts off very strong when we have Tonki like as a child, as being off, and then we get into their travels and everything. And then Tonki within the Stone Sky, we see some of Tonki, but not quite as much. And we don't have as many of those deep moments within this book as we do
Yeah.
with Yika.
I'm really surprised that Tonki, and I think Tonki was the person I was thinking about when I was saying that, where I was
That's why I
surprised.
picked up on it, because I
Yeah.
kind of assumed that was who you were thinking of.
Yeah, I was like, oh, she's so important in earlier books, and like she is, we find her right away, and we have all this stuff. And then
Hmm.
she's kind of just like, well, I had to figure out what it means to be in a relationship. And I was like, I didn't expect that from her. But I wonder if that's Jemison's intent of like, you never know who's going to be important until they're important. And I think that
Hmm.
that's also like Nasun and Esun, like we don't realize who's going to be important in our lives until it's almost like happening already. And I
Hmm.
wonder if that's intentional on her part or not. But it was definitely surprising.
I think also too, just like progressions of stories, like it may just be a thing that it was just like the progression of this character didn't fit as well into
Yeah.
certain things that were happening, versus like Yika obviously being the leader of Castrimo had a huge part to play and
Yeah.
was a very interesting part, versus like kind of the setup for Tonki going into this novel was very much like she's been doing all of this like research and everything and kind of just ignoring the people of Castrima and being a bit of a
Yeah.
pill, where she hasn't been contributing a lot and everything. So I get, and like the people of Castrima were mad at her and everything at many times. So I get where it may have been harder to get this character to like really blossom within the final book when you've kind of laid that groundwork, you know
Yeah,
what I
that's
mean? Where it's
fair.
like we've set this character up to be the one that everyone's like ticked off about, where it's like she's always out studying, doing experiments
How
and never
dare she?
contributing
Like, yeah.
never contributing anything. And then it's kind of, it wouldn't have made sense to us if we came into this novel and it was like Tonki did so many things.
Right. That's very fair. It's so strange, but
But I
yeah,
still
I did
do
think that
think
was a
Tonki is one of my favorite characters throughout the series. This book,
yes.
not as much.
Well, and I don't think either one of us cared much for Lerna at all.
No,
Like, no,
Lerna
Lerna
within
was,
this
yeah.
book, I mean, R.I.P. Lerna. That was
Lerna.
that was actually a little bit shocking to me my first time reading it, because it was just so sudden.
Yeah.
that they're traveling to the other side of the world via like the earth with a stone eater, and then they are under attack, and then all of a sudden they come through and they're like, wait, where's Lerna? And they're like, oh yeah, lost him. And they just immediately have to move on.
Yeah,
That
they're
was
just like, well,
that was a little bit shocking.
I was definitely shocked by it. I can't believe they decided that, where they were like, yeah, we'll do that. Like, it's fine.
And also when it was just like literally like a few pages before they were talking about like what's gonna happen with our baby and our relationship, and then it's just like, oh, goodbye.
Goodbye. Never mind.
Like, forget about Ashlung.
Forget about worrying about anything. It just doesn't matter anymore. Bye.
Yeah,
Like, it's
that was
yeah.
shocking to me.
It was a shocking change, I will say.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think Jemisin cared very much for Lerna either. And
No.
so he was so blink and you'll miss it. And he did feel a little bit like collateral damage. And
Lorna
I,
to me was just the character that kind of brought Esun back to her roots a little bit. He was
yeah,
that reminder for her of like what she left, and also an acknowledgement of progress that she has made, because he was often reminding her like, oh, you've changed so much, or you do this now and you never used to do that, or like even kind of keeping her grounded from the standpoint of like, well, you should have thought about this because you've ruined a million places by now, that type of thing.
I do think though, like it goes back to our we thought Tonki would be more important in this book. I
Hmm.
wonder if it's one of those where some people think that he's supposed to be more important than he is, where it's like, well, I don't really care about this character and he's not doing that much. And Yika's actually much more effective. And I wonder if Jemisin's like, yeah, some people will be more effective at getting the communication across to you than others because,
Yes.
like, you can tell Esun doesn't really take him that seriously. And, like, yes, she
Hmm.
enjoys him, but almost as someone who needs a person and not necessarily him.
Well, and that's exactly it. And I think that's an interesting point to make too, that like in times of immense stress or at the end of the world, do we find comfort just in other people and relying on other people and in community, and or does it have to be a specific person? You know what I
Right.
mean? And like you said, uh it may not have made a difference if it was Lerna or someone else. It could have been Jija. Honestly,
Yeah.
if Jija was around, like she had children with Jija. Honestly, if Alabaster had lasted longer and had not like gone on this mission to try and bring back the earth and do all this discovery himself, if he had lasted into the third book in the Stone Sky, he
Yeah.
could have been that comfort for Essun,
Right. And I
and
do
that would have
think,
made more sense.
right. So I do think Lerna almost it's weird how
I
Jemison
wouldn't
kind of
call him a
does that.
throwaway character, though. I don't know that I would call that one a throwaway character. I would just say that maybe he's a lesser character and more of just like a reminder of things for Esun. And I like the idea of just saying that this is a comfort character for her, that
Yeah.
in the end of the world, he was someone that she could find comfort in.
And she does feel bad that like he is gone. It's not something where she's like, well, she knows she didn't love him, which I think is an
Hmm.
interesting take, where she was like, well, I kind of know that I didn't love him,
And
but
she feels bad about
also
it.
I can feel bad about this and I can, mourn for him, and that's also okay. And I do think that is an effective message to kind of talk about like there are different relationships you said like at the
Hmm.
end of the world where you're not going to get everything, you're not going to get the romance. Sometimes you just get comfort.
I think it's interesting too when we're talking about just Esun and the different relationships that she's gone through, how within this book she has a lot of like thinking about Alabaster, but she thinks about Jija quite a bit within this book
Yeah.
specifically. And after she learns about his death, she wants to go visit him and everything. And I think that that's actually very interesting, the way that she will reflect on other relationships and think about, like, oh, yeah, well, it was different with Inan because X, Y, or Z happened, but it's like this with Jija or whatever. It could have been like this with Jija. And I thought that that was like an interesting thing too, that happened a little more within this book than previous books, just because she was thinking about Jija a little more, but
Yeah.
that she had a lot of reflection upon like the different relationships that she had with men. And yeah, so I think that was interesting too. But like Jija got a lot of thought out of Essun in this book in particular, and I I thought that that was a unique thing to bring up, that she did mourn him. She did feel bad about his death. He was the father of her children. She did have a happy life with him for a period of time.
Yeah, I think so. And I do think it's normal to like, because she was so angry at him. It's also normal to show that like you can be fully angry at someone, you can wish them dead, and it can still be sad when they die. Like the world
Yes.
is not black and white like that. It is much more complex. The situation's a lot more nuanced than that.
Hmm.
And I do like that we got to see her mourn and also feel a loss that it was her daughter who ended up killing him as well, because she
Yes.
knows how that will affect her daughter and how she will have to grieve and have that on her when she didn't want her daughter to suffer that way.
Hmm.
And it also leads to another important part of this that I've noticed where Asuna is a very strong character in all three of these novels. Like she has her own beliefs. It's really hard to get her away from those beliefs. But in this book, we kind of find her coming to terms and like the people calling her out. It's finally getting through where like she is starting to build the
Yes.
community. And when she sees her daughter, I think the Asuna at the beginning of the books would have been mad and frustrated with her for falling for what Shafa said. And she
Mhm.
has this moment where she's like, he was the person my daughter needed me to be, and that is devastating. And I thought
Yes.
that was such a beautiful look at that section and just so well done. I was shocked that like we had that moment, but I was so impressed because I the entire time I was like, what's she gonna do when she sees her daughter and her daughter loves Shafa? What's she gonna do? What's she gonna do? And the fact that
Hmm.
she's just like, yeah, that he is who I should have been, and I will have to live with that forever. I thought that was really well done.
She takes it more as like a criticism of herself than
Yeah.
a criticism of Nasun. And it does in that moment show the growth that she has undergone, like you said, where all this time we would have thought, she hasn't been accepting of different criticisms from other people within the group or anything, from Lerna or from Alabaster or from Yika. And once we get to this point where she has this confrontation, we can see how far she's come in that she's able to accept her part in
Yeah.
basically pushing Nasun into Shafa's hands.
Yeah.
I actually
So
not
beautiful.
pushing her into Nasun's hands, but maybe just allowing Nasun to walk right over to
Yeah.
Shafa.
It's really impressive to kind of have that come to Jesus moment, for lack of a better term, but
Mm-hmm.
it was really beautiful, and it shows that like it really shows the effective, it sets the stage for the ending where Nasun is pulled out of her need to save Shafa by watching her mom feel joy for the person she's become. And
Yeah.
that's like the first time she's seen that. And that amount of acceptance from her mother is so important that it stops her and it makes her realize that she can't harm other people. I thought that was also
Mm-hmm.
a, a
Well,
little
because she hadn't
nugget.
cared for a period
Yeah.
of time. All she cared about was just saving Shafa. She was going to kill everyone if it
Mm-hmm.
meant to save Shafa's life.
Yep. Exactly.
I think Shafa's journey in this book is interesting as well.
It's interesting and it's difficult to read. I think you and I struggle the
Yes.
most with this. And
It's
yeah.
so hard to get on board with that character knowing the abuse that he has committed. And I think that even second read through I really struggled with that character. So but it's still one of those things where we know we've been told that Shafa's redemption is Nasun. Shafa's redemption is the way that he has helped Nasun and treated her, and that Nasun and the things that she will do are Shafa's redemption because he helped her, which is difficult to wrap your head around.
Well, especially when we can see from this book that like he hasn't he hasn't come all the way that he needs to.
Hmm.
Like he isn't there yet.
I mean, he's still
And
calling her a monster.
yeah. And he still sees her as less than, and he's still kind of talking like flippantly about genocide in random sections of
Hmm.
this book. And so it's hard when you're like, okay, that's his redemption. Or even in the section when we're here, he was able to live for so long because of his love for others. And I think it's a difficult thing to wrap our heads around because we've been taught so much that love is something freely given, love is sacrifice, love is all these things. And I think it's really weird to see a book where it's like, well, love can still exist even if it is self-serving sometimes. And we're like,
Hmm.
oh, that's a messy thought that I don't think I fully know how to feel about. Like,
Well, and it's hard too because I think there's like some people that could read this book and be like, well, he's 40,000 years old, and kind of like dismiss away some of the things that he says or does and be like, well, he's 40,000 years, similar to like what we do with old people to be
right.
like,
Like,
oh, they're old, they're not
he's
going to
come a
change their
long
opinion.
way.
He's come a
Like,
long way. I guess
yeah.
we give him credit for that. In this fantasy novel, I'm not giving Shafa any credit,
No.
but I think that it's very interesting when we have like that kind of background, but also just like thinking about like the love keeping him alive so much longer than all of the other people within his same. I don't know if I would call them a race, the Guardians.
Yeah. I don't know.
They're all humans too, so it's weird. But the within the Guardians, keeping him alive so much longer, that love, it's an icky feeling to know that he can associate abuse with love and also that he justifies the abuse knowing that there are worse outcomes for Origins than him being their tutor, and it's it's really hard to get on board with Shafa and also to when he still is alive
Yeah.
later excuse me when he still is alive later on in the Stone Sky, and we're just like, how has he persisted after all this time? Shafa is still around. It's very much a character where we're just like, oh, please just put us out of our suffering. We just wanted Shafa to kind of drift away.
Right? I just wanted him to go away. And I do think it's really good that you mentioned the like love coming from abuse because I also think like this is a very good and honest view of people who can abuse others and still say they love them and me because I think like it's so easy
Oh,
for
and
people to
the
say like
justification of the
mm,
actions too, I think, is an extremely important part to bring up too, because I think abusers do justify the things that they do.
yes. And abusers think that they're loving someone and it's just a
Yes.
moment and they're going to stop. And I do think this is a very honest look at that, where it's like, this is abuse. He is abusing, and like it is love that feeds him. And that's also just really gross, but really honest that these things
Mm-hmm.
happen.
Yeah, for sure. I I think that it was interesting to get that background of like where Guardians come from in Core Point and to find out about the Core Stone and see how it was removed by the Earth and everything and how the Earth specifically attacked him,
Mm-hmm.
being that comfort for Nasun. I think
Yeah.
that that was an interesting way to go for this too. But I think when we're just talking in general about Shafa and how we feel about him in this book, it's so hard
Yeah.
as a reader to empathize with him at all. And it's, I think, in proximity to like the evil people within our own world that we, wish we're not doing all these evil things and we're not so horrendous. It's like, can't they just go away? Like,
Yeah.
can they not just shut up? Just get off of Twitter, quit doing these things, just shut up. We don't want to
Quit
hear from
owning
you
Twitter.
anymore. Like, quit owning Twitter, quit saying anything, quit getting involved in people's lives and making decisions for them, ruining our lives, that type of thing. But I think that it all kind of feels familiar when we're talking about Shafa, where it's like, yeah, he has done so much bad, and it's hard for us to understand that be the we can't really decide what's going to be his redemption and
Yeah.
if or if he gets a redemption or not.
I don't know. It's hard. Yeah. I don't know because I don't think. I think you and I kind of fall on the side of like, well, he didn't do enough work, so he definitely hasn't earned his redemption. But yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's difficult. And then it becomes even more complicated if you're throwing in the whole like, well, he's technically a new person since he has memory
Oof.
loss ugh, and that's another
Mm.
layer too that is tricky to consider. But I did think that that was an interesting way for Jemisin to take the story to add in the memory loss and how there was very much this piecing together of what he knew.
Yeah, it is interesting to see how the memory loss comes about because I do think his love for Nasun, despite not being anywhere near where it needs to be, it did feel
Mm-hmm.
a lot more genuine than it did before he had this memory
Mm-hmm.
loss.
Mm-hmm.
And then him coming to terms with who he was and kind of knowing that he is meant to suffer for specific reasons. And I'm not sure he always knows the actual valid reasons, but knowing he should pay for something
Sure.
is kind of step one. But it is interesting to kind of have that question of if we can't remember the bad things we did, do we still, is that something where we still need to be mindful of or something we still need to
Right.
pay for? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It makes me think too of like if we're this is maybe too on the nose, but if we're like talking about like people with Alzheimer's disease, if somebody develops memory loss or Alzheimer's disease, like they don't remember horrendous things that they did, like does that make them? And you know, a lot of times people will kind of adopt new personalities of
Yeah.
sorts with their Alzheimer's disease, and Alzheimer's is a devastating disease. I don't claim to know that much about it, but I know that some people do act very differently when
Yeah.
they lose a lot of their
Well, they get
memory.
really
So,
angry because if you're someone who you don't understand what's going on, like I've had it recently happen with family members where like a big thing is they're going to stop talking to people because they don't want to admit that they don't remember who this person
sure,
is or
sure.
they don't understand what's going on. So they're feeling isolated in their own mind, but then they feel isolated within a community. And so then the people they love the most, they're a source of frustration because it's the person they
Hmm.
can trust, but also sometimes they forget why or they forget details and you get angry. Like it's natural to get angry
Sure.
and frustrated. And so you do start to become someone different. And there are moments where you know that the person didn't mean it. And this is different with Shafa because sometimes with Shafa it's
Like
like,
I
oh,
was
this
thinking
is
more
yeah.
like just if somebody is like an evil person,
Yeah.
you know, who
Yeah.
develops Alzheimer's disease and then uh,
Oh yeah.
loses
And
all
then it's like
recollection of the things
right.
that they
It's
have done. Like, say it's like a murderer who
yeah.
loses all recollection of the things that they have done, and once they have developed Alzheimer's disease, they've kind of adopted a new personality of sorts
Yeah.
where
That's fair.
they might be a lot kinder
Yeah.
person and be totally nice and doing all these saying all these nice things or whatever, but it's like can we just because they have lost their memory and have a disease, can we say like, oh yeah, we forgive them? Like
Yeah.
I
I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I think it's up to the individual who was harmed because I think
Hmm.
sometimes it's like, well, you don't
Yeah.
have to hate them, but they were awful to me, so I get to.
Yep. Yep.
Like, I do think that that's part of it, but I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that wasn't the
No,
best
you're
way
fine.
to put it with the
I
Alzheimer's connection. It just made me think specifically of like his Shafa's memory loss being similar to like if someone were to
no, that's fair.
have Alzheimer's and become like a different type of person, can we, you know, say, oh well, we forgive them for previous transgressions? Like, oh, I don't
I
know.
think a weird thing that we haven't really gone over much is the discussion of consent in these books. Because
Hmm.
we have certain things of like, do you consent to have your body eaten? Do you consent to do this? Do you consent to do that? You know, because a huge thing that I found fascinating was by the end of the book, it seemed like Essun wasn't fully aware of the fact that by eating her, Hoa was reproducing and creating a new stone eater.
Yes,
Like it didn't
she very
always
much thought for a long period of time that this was just to sustain him. And she was, it seemed like very okay with that. That it was
she
just
was
like,
really fine with just
okay,
sustainability.
sure.
But I do think it was weird that Hoa never made sure because he seemed to care about consent, where he was like, well, I need you to like freely give me to eat and things like that. And like in Hoa's past life, I think it's interesting where I forget the woman's name, Kalani, is it?
Kalenli.
Kalenli. Kalenli, it looks like has a relationship almost forced on her by her adopted brother
Mm-hmm.
through ways of being unable to willingly say no because in their
Yes.
different positions and stages in life, he has power over her.
Yes.
And we see that there is a child that results out of that. And so it's really strange to me that like it seems to be, and I think it's just a real world example of just like consent has to be meaningful and you have to understand it because there were parts of this book where I'm like consent seems to be playing with a little bit on the wild side and it was
Mm-hmm.
shocking that Hoa had that expectation where it's like well he's this being who's lived for thousands and thousands of years but he doesn't understand that Essun doesn't understand what's happening like
I think it's complicated too because I think we do have Hoa who does want Essun to continue to survive and go on and understand what's happening to her because I mean that's the whole reason we have this entire story is he's explaining what has happened to her. He's been helping her
yes
all along. But at the same time, I don't know that Hoa necessarily understands his own creation the most clearly. You know what I mean?
yeah
Where even when we're getting these Syl Anagist chapters, they're a little murky. They're hard to figure out what's going on. It's not totally clear to Hua, who is then Hoa, what happens and why things are happening. He's kind of putting the pieces together himself. So we have just kind of a interesting unraveling of understanding here. And
yeah
it makes the issue of like, do you want to continue to be an immortal being uh, a lot more complicated when we have
yeah
someone who doesn't necessarily describe it or seem to understand themselves the repercussions of what that means. Just that they care for this person a lot and they've been helping them and want to see them go on.
And maybe that's a good look at it where we're coming from like Hoa is a being who's been around forever and ever and ever, but he still has a very significant lack of understanding because he almost
Yes.
feels like childlike in many ways where he's like, well, I love this person. I don't want her to go away like Kalenli did. I have these relationships with people. We don't really get along, but we kind of get along because there's no other way. And he is very naive in very significant ways.
Well, and I also think too, it's mentioned by Hua that when certain members have of the story have learned pieces of information that they've it's been shocking to them that they
Yeah,
have to very carefully kind of give breadcrumbs of information so as not to like literally shock people to death or like totally disrupt their entire state of being.
right,
Because when Essun figures out that this is a form of reproduction, she immediately wants to go and talk to Alabaster because she's like, oh my gosh, so that's Alabaster right there. And Hoa has to be like, oh, well, I don't really want you to go
sort of, but
and
not really.
wreck his whole world.
Yeah,
And that's just a lot of information for him to handle right now. He's basically this new little baby that doesn't understand what has happened totally yet. And he's got to form a personality and everything on his own because he's not necessarily the same. But even before people become stone eaters, I think it's a similar thing. Like Alabaster learns information about the creation and breaking of the world and is completely shocked. So
right.
it, it's very difficult to talk about consent when it comes to Hoa in particular, I think, because the events surrounding the creation of the Stone Eaters and also the breaking of the earth is very complicated and misunderstood even by that group of people, I think. And it's also clouded with a lot of very dark things that have happened because if we talk about like the history of the people that Kalenli shares with them and how like basically the origins came from I think it was the Nisi, one of these groups of people
Yeah.
that basically they had to spread out all throughout the world and try and preserve pieces of their culture because they were targeted. They
Yeah.
it was diaspora basically. So they went all over the place to try and preserve pieces of themselves and everything. So there is a lot of horrible things that have happened within just these specific groups of people. So it makes it a lot. I'm not saying that it's okay to not consent to things, but I
No,
think
but it
that
is
it's definitely a
harder.
cloudier situation than
Yes.
just being like, "Are you okay with this?" Yes. So,
I do think it's just interesting though, because I was really
oh,
shocked by
absolutely.
like some of the overall arching stories when it came to that. And like when we think about Nasun, like things that the gray man or Steel signs her up for, where it's like, are
Hmm.
you writing checks for body can't cash? Like, what's going
Hmm.
on here?
Well, I mean,
Because
that
even
relationship is different too because and the relationships between the three Stone Eaters, the main ones, Hua, Renwa, and Gewa, who are
yeah, right,
Antimony,
yeah.
Steel, and Hoa, it's interesting the relationships that they develop with the people that they are with because Steel and Nasun, for sure, there's a definite relationship there where Steel does not give a crap
No,
about
he does not
Nasun.
care.
He wants her to be a tool to destroy it all because he is over it. He's
Yep.
very much over it.
No, agreed. Wild. Just wild. Anyone else or anything else that you feel like we haven't talked about?
I feel like I could rant about this book for a really long time.
Well, yes, but we did some pretty good high bar. Like, I,
Did we? Okay. We're so smart, man. I hope people are able to like piece together some of my thoughts because I feel like I'm a little jumbled here today with
I think this is a very
getting things
jumbled
out.
book, though. Like, it's so deep, it's so specific. And a great way to talk to us is let us know if you have anything that we haven't touched on in any of these books that you want us to.
Mhm.
I commented on our Discord asking what people think so far to prepare us for our final wrap up episode because next week is
Mhm.
actually our series finale on Breaking the Earth. Like,
Yeah,
we're
because there's only three books, so
this is it. It's
that's it.
not like Oathbound where we're going to come back to the drawing board. This is going to be
It's
it,
not like the
guys.
Dresden
So
Files where it
uh-uh.
never ends.
Where we'll never ever ever end. It'll just go on and so forth. But please reach out to us if we haven't touched on something that you think is really important to the books. We'd be happy to discuss that more.
Hmm.
So next week, please join us as we dive into the series finale and our final thoughts
The Broken
on
Earth.
N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy. And also, thank you so much for being along with us on this journey right
Yeah, thanks
now.
for listening.
This has been an amazing season so far. I can't wait to close next week, and I'm sad to see it close.
Me
This
too.
was,
Like, I
yeah.
really love this series so much. It has a very special place in my heart. I just really think it's fantastic.
So
So
please let
I'll
us know
be
your
sad
final
to be
thoughts.
leaving it.
You can add those to our Discord. You can find that in our link tree over at OWWR Pod on Instagram, and I believe Blue Sky. But we are on everywhere where you can find the social medias. We're practically on all of them. So please follow us at OWWR Pod. Check out our reading schedule at ourpod.com, and tell a friend about us or rate,
Yeah,
review, and
it really
subscribe.
helps.
Those are huge ways to get people involved in the conversation. We want everyone to be involved in the conversation. We have some exciting things coming up, like going back to Oathbound, cycling through Legendborn, and then into a very special indie mission where we will be focusing on authors of color. So please make sure that you are following
Mhm.
along for all of that. It's really important to highlight all of these amazing works, which will be our bonus episode after our series finale. So join us for all of that and more here on our pod. Bye.
Bye.